Pollination is the process that allows plants to reproduce. In some cases, the wind and rain blow pollen between plants, which causes pollen to transfer to the female reproductive part of the plant. However, most plants need insects and other pollinators to pollinate from one plant to the next. Pollination is an essential part of plant reproduction. Pollen from a flower's anthers, the male part of the plant, rubs or drops onto a pollinator. The pollinator then takes this pollen to another flower, where the pollen sticks to the stigma, the female part. The fertilized flower later yields fruit and seeds. Cross-pollination is preferred because it brings about variation in species. Self-pollination does not bring about any variations. Variation brings new traits to the plant which may be advantageous to the plant. For example, it helps the new plant to defend against diseases. Within 2 to 3 days after fertilization, the pistil's carpel elongates and swells to become a seed pod, containing the fertilized ovules. The sepals and petals wither and drop off, having completed their functions. After pollination, between days 17 to 35 in the fast plant's life cycle, embryos are developing into seeds. The nitrogen content of pollen typically ranges around 2 to 5%, with the average being around 3%, meaning that a typical pollen sample would contain approximately 3% nitrogen by weight. This nitrogen is primarily found within the protein components of the pollen grain. To estimate the protein content of pollen, scientists often use a conversion factor of 6.25, multiplying the nitrogen content by this factor to get an approximate protein percentage. Different plant species produce pollen with varying nitrogen content, depending on their nutritional makeup and environmental conditions. The nitrogen content of pollen is important for pollinators like bees, as it provides essential protein for their development. Pollinators provide pollination services to over 180,000 different plant species and more than 1,200 crops. There are over 200,000 species of animal pollinators, and the vast majority of these are insects. Most pollinators are active from early spring to late fall, so have plants that bloom throughout your growing season. Leave patches of bare ground and brush piles for overwintering and nesting. Scatter native seeds during the winter. Insect pollinators include beetles, flies, ants, moths, butterflies, bumblebees, honeybees, solitary bees, and wasps. All insect pollinators have a fascinating 4-stage life cycle of egg larva pupa mago, adult, which can vary greatly from species to species. You can tell bumblebees from honeybees by the way their bodies look. Bumblebees are black with yellow stripes, have thick, round bodies that are 0.4 to 1.6 inches thick and are covered with fuzzy hair. Bumblebees are tolerant of people, so you can get close and observe them without bothering them. The bumblebee life cycle begins with queens emerging in the spring. During early summer, the first workers emerge, and the colony grows until the fall. In the fall, new queens will mate with males and go into diapause during the winter months. Worker bumblebees have relatively short lives. 4 weeks is the average lifespan. At the end of the season, only the new queens will live to establish new colonies the following year, and the rest of the colony dies. A nest is founded by a single queen who lives for about 1 year and is active for 1 season. While the life cycle is continuous, with each foundress queen overlapping with her queen offspring in the fall, we can imagine the start of the life cycle to begin when queens emerge from hibernation. Only bumblebee queens and female workers have a stinger that can sting. This is due to evolutionary changes that cause their ovipositors to develop into defensive tools. Bumblebees do make honey, and it is a lot harder to harvest than that of honeybees. Bumblebees usually nest in the ground and only have an average of a few hundred to 1,000 bees in a colony. Therefore, they don't produce as much as honeybees do. In the past 2 decades, American bumblebee populations have dropped by 90%. Pesticides and development are poisoning this bee and destroying its habitat. Carpenter bees have smooth abdomens that are black, green, or purple. Bumblebees are hairy with black and yellow bands on their abdomens. Carpenter bees have larger, black heads. Bumblebees have black and yellow heads. A male-female pair bore into a piece of wood and occupy one hole. Carpenter bees don't mind living near each other, though. Multiple pairs will often bore into and occupy the same wood structure. Female carpenter bees can sting you. although they are very unlikely to do so unless you're handling them or poking your fingers into their burrows. Carpenter bees undergo a complete metamorphosis cycle with 4 stages: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. The life cycle typically takes about 7 weeks, but can vary depending on the temperature. Carpenter bees can live up to 3 years, but their lifespan depends on how they live. Solitary bees usually live 1 year. Subordinate queens can live up to 3 years if they nest socially. Primary queen's health declines after a season of nest construction and foraging, and they often die after 1 season. Eggs hatch within the cell. Larvae feed on the pollen and nectar that the female packs into the cell before sealing it. Larvae develop into pupae. Adults emerge from the pupal stage and chew their way out of the cell. They stay in the nest for a few weeks before emerging in late August to feed and store pollen. Adults hibernate in their nests during the winter and emerge in the spring to mate and start the cycle again. Carpenter bees prefer to make their nests in unpainted, untreated wood. They drill a half-inch entrance hole perpendicular to the wood grain, then drill with the grain to create galleries. If you've spotted a carpenter bee hovering, it is likely a harmless male. Male carpenter bees are territorial and tend to appear aggressive and dangerous, but their scary exterior is their only defense mechanism. Carpenter bees are important pollinators of many flowering plants found in our gardens, natural areas, and on farms. In fact, 15% of our agricultural crops are pollinated by native bees such as carpenter bees. Using their powerful thoracic muscles, carpenter bees sonicate the dry pollen grains out of the flower's anthers. This type of pollen gathering is called buzz pollination. Carpenter bees are excellent pollinators of eggplant, tomato, and other vegetables and flowers. You can prevent carpenter bees from invading by painting or varnishing external wood, placing slabs of wood away from the home, or using almond oil to repel them. Unlike hive-forming honeybees, most wild species are solitary, nesting in cavities in rocks and wood or on the ground in leaves and woody debris. There are about 20,000 wild bee species globally and 3,600 in the United States and Canada. Solitary bees are non-aggressive. Because solitary bees do not have a store of honey to protect, they are non-aggressive. The males generally have no sting, and the females will only sting if handled roughly or trod on. About 30% of solitary bees nest in cavities in hollow stems and pre-existing holes in wood such as branches or tree trunks. The remainder, approximately 70% of solitary bees, nest in the ground. They excavate nests in bare soil or sparsely vegetated areas under plants. They prefer sandy, loose, and well-drained soils. Usually in the spring, male solitary bees will exit the nest and hang around the entrance for the female bees to emerge. After mating, the males die and the female solitary bees will leave in search of a new nest. They gather nectar and pollen as food for their own offspring and provide little or no further care after their eggs are laid. Mason and leafcutter bees are both solitary bees that belong to the Megachilidae bee family and are known for their pollination abilities. Mason bees are often confused with a housefly due to their size and blue tint, but if you listen closely you will hear a housefly will hum and the mason bee buzzes. Leafcutters are a lighter beige in color, quite small and narrow, and their fuzzy bellies are easy to see as they quietly waft around you. Leafcutter bees are not aggressive and have a mild sting that is used only when they are handled. Leafcutter bees cut the leaves of plants. The cut leaf fragments are used to form nest cells. Leafcutter bees nest in soft, rotted wood or in the stems of large, pithy plants, such as roses. Depending on where you live, leafcutter bees come out usually towards the middle of July through early August. Once they emerge, they live for about 4 to 6 weeks pollinating and laying their eggs. Sometimes you can get 2 life cycles of leafcutter bees if the temperatures stay consistently hot for the new babies to grow. Adult female leafcutter bees will cut smooth, semicircular pieces from leaves to use in the formation of nests in which eggs will be laid. This solitary bee has a relatively short lifespan, with females living about 2 months and males dying soon after mating. Mason bees are known for emerging in the spring and pollinating fruit trees like apples, pears, almonds, cherries, blueberries, and strawberries. They use mud to build their nests. A female mason bee typically lives for about 6 to 8 weeks. Mason bees emerge in early spring, mate, and nest. They are active for about 6 to 8 weeks, which often coincides with the blooming of fruit trees. Female mason bees lay up to 30 eggs in their lifetime. They place a loaf of nectar and pollen in each cell, lay an egg on top, and wall off the cell with mud. The eggs hatch into larvae that feed on the pollen nectar loaf. When the larva is fully grown, it spins a cocoon and changes into a pupa. The pupa hibernates over the winter. The following spring, the pupa emerges as an adult. Mason bees are native to the United States and are considered native pollinators. They are docile and non-aggressive, and their stingers are less painful than those of honey bees. Both mason and leafcutter bees are considered super pollinators because they can double or triple yields. Mason bees are attracted to fruit blossoms, while leafcutter bees prefer legume flowers. Leafcutter bees have a short flying range, making them ideal for small organic or community farms. Many parasitoids, such as flies, wasps, and beetles, attack the nests of leafcutter bees. Mason and leafcutter bees are easy to raise and fun to watch. You can harvest and clean the cocoons and blocks to remove harmful predators. Wasps first appeared in the fossil record during the Jurassic period and diversified into many superfamilies by the Cretaceous period. Wasps are part of the Hymenoptera order of insects, which also includes bees and ants. Wasps are a successful and diverse group of insects, with tens of thousands of species. The adult wasp will mate with several males, who die soon after mating. The female then finds a suitable place to build her nest and lay eggs. She will continue to lay eggs until she dies or runs out of food, or is killed by predators. Adult worker wasps can live between 12 to 22 days, while the queen will survive for the entire year until the cold causes the colony to die off. If you are accounting the time that it takes for a wasp egg to develop into an adult, it can take between 40 to 60 days depending on external environmental factors. Only newly mated queens survive the winter. The mated queens find a sheltered spot, such as in tree bark crevices or other protected areas, to hibernate until the following spring. Wasps are pollinators, and they play a valuable role in ecosystems and agriculture and pollinate many plants. Wasps pollinate at least 960 plant species, including 164 that are completely dependent on them. Populations of yellow jackets build up in summer and are considered beneficial insects that pollinate flowers. Fig trees are pollinated by specialized fig wasps, which are very small wasps in the Agaonidae family. The economic value of wasp pollination services to agriculture is estimated to be over $250 billion per year. Wasps are predators of crop-damaging insects like aphids, and their value as crop protectors is estimated to be over $416 billion per year. While wasps are important pollinators, they are not as efficient as bees because they are not covered in fuzzy hairs that help pollen stick to their bodies. However, wasps can still transfer pollen between flowers using the fine hairs on their bodies. Mellifica is one of the few wasp species that produces honey. It is also considered a delicacy in some cultures in Mexico. This wasp species is of use to humans because it can be used to control pest species and to pollinate avocados. Mud daubers are fascinating solitary wasps. Mud daubers' nests dating back to the Bronze Age have been found in Romania. Mud daubers are solitary wasps with narrow waists. Different species can be identified by their coloration and nest architecture. Mud daubers help control the population of spiders and other insects, including black widow spiders. Female mud daubers collect mud to build nests after mating. They look for a place with access to mud, protection from the weather, and lots of spiders for food. They may attempt to attack if they feel you are threatening them or their nest, however. Unlike some other wasp species, mud daubers do not form large colonies and are not territorial. They are generally non-hostile and will only sting if they feel threatened or are provoked. Mud dauber stings are incredibly uncommon. Mud daubers are attracted to the color yellow, so planting yellow flowers can help attract them. Mud daubers are important pollinators as they visit flowers to feed on nectar, aiding in the pollination of various plant species. Mud daubers are attracted to flowers and plants that are sweet-smelling and bright in color, especially yellow and orange. As adults, dirt daubers primarily eat flower nectar and tree sap. They use their long mouth parts to gather pollen and nectar from flowers. However, when they are young, they eat spiders that their parents seal into their mud nests. Dirt daubers are skilled hunters that paralyze spiders with their stings and carry them back to their nests. They lay their eggs on or near the spiders for their larvae to eat. Dirt daubers are drawn to areas with food, water, and shelter. They are especially attracted to fresh mud, which they use to build their nests. They also like access to water sources like ponds, pools, or outdoor water features. Ants can pollinate some plants, such as some spurges. However, ants are generally not considered to be important pollinators because they are more likely to rob nectar from flowers than to pollinate them. Ants are wingless and crawl into flowers to reach nectar, so they often brush off pollen grains before moving on to the next flower. Additionally, some ants secrete a substance that kills pollen grains. Ants are often seen visiting flowers to collect nectar, but they are more likely to act as nectar robbers than pollinators. When ants rob nectar, they can make it less likely that other pollinators will visit the flower because there is no longer a nectar attractant. Ants can also be beneficial to plants in other ways, such as by dispersing seeds and removing herbivorous insects. In some cases, ants are the primary pollinators for plants in arid or alpine conditions where other pollinators are scarce. Butterflies and moths are another valuable pollinator group in our world, from grasslands to jungles. These fluttering creatures are highly sensitive indicators of the environment's health, in addition to playing a crucial role in pollinating our food and flowers. Many trees support butterflies and moths. Oaks are a valuable host tree for many butterfly species, including the mourning cloak, striped hairstreak, and banded hairstreak. In the United States, oak trees support the caterpillars of over 897 butterfly and moth species. Cherry trees are a host tree for many butterflies and moths, including the American snout, red-spotted purple, and viceroy. Hackberry is a larval host for many butterflies, including the tawny emperor, and mourning cloak. Sweet bay magnolia is a host tree for the eastern tiger swallowtail, Palmetto's swallowtail, and spicebush swallowtail. Hollyhock is a host tree for the gray hairstreak, common checkered skipper, and painted lady. Citrus trees are a larval food source for the giant swallowtail. Hoptree is a larval food source for the giant swallowtail. Pipevine is a larval food source for the pipevine swallowtail. Wild cherry and plum are larval food sources for the tiger swallowtail. Elm and hackberry is a larval food source for the question mark. Butterflies and moths have many things in common. The life cycles of both, during which they undergo complete metamorphosis, include 4 distinct stages: egg, caterpillar, larva, pupa, and adult, imago. Each species develops at its own pace. Bees are undoubtedly important, but our work has shown that moths pollinate flowers at a faster rate than day-flying insects. When a moth or butterfly lands on a flower to drink nectar, the flower's pollen becomes attached, and as the butterfly moves from flower to flower drinking more nectar, the pollen is transferred. Yucca plants and yucca moths have co-evolved to rely entirely on each other. The yucca moth is the only pollinator for the flowers, and the moth caterpillars feed only on yucca seeds. The first true flies, or dipterans, appeared about 240 million years ago during the Middle Triassic period. They evolved in wet environments and adapted to feed on a variety of nutrient-rich substances. The fly tree of life has experienced 3 periods of rapid diversification, with new species developing during unstable periods of Earth's history. For example, many lower Diptera species developed during the Triassic, and many lower Brachycera species appeared during the Jurassic. According to scientific evidence, flies are considered to be among the first insects to pollinate plants, alongside beetles, with fossil records suggesting they were likely the primary pollinators of early flowering plants in the late Jurassic era, around 150 million years ago. Scientists believe the first flowers were likely simple and accessible to small insects like flies and beetles, which could easily access their pollen. Flies are considered generalist feeders, meaning they visit a variety of flowers, which would have facilitated pollen transfer between different plants. Fly pollination, also known as meiophily, is a method of plant reproduction facilitated by various species of flies. Flies are one of the most diverse groups of pollinators. Flies are important pollinators of plants and are especially important in environments where bees are less common. Flies are essential for the reproduction of many wild and cultivated plants. A recent analysis of crop species found that flies visited 72% of the 105 crops studied. Bees visited 93%. While most flies don't have specialized hairs for carrying pollen like bees, they are still efficient pollinators. Different species of flies are present year-round and are often a good alternative to bees. The two-winged insects, flies, gnats, mosquitoes, is a very large group. Many of them specifically visit flowers, such as the syrphid flies or flower flies. They are not as hairy as bees and as efficient in carrying pollen, but some are good pollinators. Biting midges pollinate cacao, and hoverflies are prolific pollinators that visit over 70% of animal-pollinated wildflowers. In trials, a number of fly species have proved to be effective pollinators of seed crops, oilseed rape, sweet peppers, and strawberries. Recent experiments in the UK, for instance, found that releasing a mixed bunch of hoverflies into cages of flowering strawberry plants increased the yield of fruit by more than 70%. Beetles were among the first insects to visit flowers, and they remain essential pollinators today. They are especially important pollinators for ancient species such as magnolias and spicebush. While the vast majority of generalist beetle species visit well-known plants such as carrot, buttercup, sunflower, or cabbage, some beetle species are specialist pollinators of descendants of plants they visited millions of years ago. Water lilies, custard apples, magnolias, and allspice plants. Blooming flowers, fruit trees, and other types of budding plants provide the sweet nectar that many kinds of beetles find irresistible. Ladybugs are great pollinators. They travel from garden to garden and tree to tree to gather food, which includes moving pollen and nectar. Along the way, they fertilize the flowers as they go. Weevils are important pollinators, but they are often overlooked. In fact, even people who study pollination don't usually consider weevils to be one of the main pollinators. Plants engaged in weevil-mediated pollination are generally of typical Cantharophilus type, exhibiting large, white, and fragrant flowers or inflorescences, and they also show specific structures to host the larval stages of their specialist pollinators. Weevils pollinate cycads. Weevils pollinate oil palms, which are used to make peanut butter and Nutella. Before weevils were discovered to pollinate oil palms, it was thought that wind was the pollinator. The weevil Ankylorhynchus trapezicalis is the main pollinator of this South American palm. Honeybees have slender, oval-shaped bodies, with hair on the head, thorax, and abdomen. More than 100 U.S. grown crops rely on pollinators. The added revenue to crop production from pollinators is valued at $18 billion. Bees can recognize and differentiate between human faces, so they can recognize their beekeepers over somebody else, according to a study that was done by researchers at Cambridge in 2004. While about 20,000 species of bees exist, only 8 species of honeybee are recognized, with a total of 43 subspecies, although historically 7 to 11 species are recognized. Apis andreniformis, the black dwarf honeybee; Apis cerana, the eastern honeybee; Apis dorsata, the giant honeybee; Apis florea, the red dwarf honeybee; Apis koshchevnikovi, Koshchevnikov's honeybee; Apis laboriosa, the Himalayan giant honeybee; Apis mellifera, the western honeybee; and Apis nigrocincta, the Philippine honeybee. Honeybees are America's primary commercial pollinator, although there are over 4,000 types of bees in the United States. Honeybees are thought to have originated in eastern tropical Africa and evolved from predatory wasps that lived 120 million years ago. The oldest known fossil bee is a stingless bee from New Jersey that dates back 96 to 74 million years. The most common domesticated honeybee, Apis mellifera, was first domesticated before 2600 BC. Honeybees spread from Africa to Europe and Asia, and many subspecies have adapted to local climates and geography. Humans learned to harvest honey almost 8,000 years ago. Honey is bees' way of preserving their food, so they have something to eat when there aren't many flowers in bloom. Honey can be stored in the hive and consumed when needed. If bees stored nectar without turning it into honey first, it would ferment. Honey can also ferment when it has too much moisture, which can happen in the hive or after the honey is bottled. Honey can also go bad if it's contaminated or stored incorrectly. If your honey has visible mold, or if it smells fermented or off, you should throw it away. Honey is used as a sweetener, food preservative, and to make wax. Flowers that grow in clusters or groups, such as butterfly bush, goldenrod, and milkweed, are efficient for bees, as they can gather more pollen and nectar in a single visit. The mountain laurel is a pretty flowering tree that is found all across the eastern U.S. is toxic to bees. Rhododendron is widespread in the U.S., especially in forested areas, and is toxic to bees. The buckeye tree is toxic to honeybees. Unfortunately, honeybees can spread diseases to our native bees. Deformed wing virus, for example, can be passed from honeybees to bumblebees, and can also amplify and distribute diseases within a bee community. Urban honeybee hive densities are often too high. Pesticides can directly affect pollinators or remain in the environment for extended periods. Herbicides can kill forage plants, and insecticides can contaminate pollen grains.